In episode 37, Implement Application Security Controls That Actually Work, we focus on taking control lists that often live in spreadsheets or standards and turning them into protections that actually fire in production. The aim is to design controls that are reliable, measurable, and as invisible as possible to legitimate users while still frustrating attackers. Instead of thinking about individual defenses as isolated checkboxes, you want to think about them as part of a coherent protection fabric around the application. When that fabric is designed well, security becomes part of how the system behaves, not a bolt-on that people work around. This mindset is at the heart of controls that really work. A practical starting point is mapping specific threats to specific controls so that every defense you deploy has a clear purpose. For each major threat or misuse case, you can ask which control families are relevant and what behavior they need to enforce. This approach helps you avoid cargo culting patterns, where you blindly copy configurations or rules because they are fashionable rather than because they match your risks. When you link threats and controls explicitly, gaps become obvious, such as missing protections around particular data flows or actors. It also becomes easier to explain why a control exists and what would happen if it were weakened or removed. Once you know which controls you need, you must pay attention to when and how they activate. Effective controls initialize early in the request or process lifecycle, ideally before application logic has a chance to do something risky with untrusted data. They default to denying access, actions, or flows unless explicit, verifiable conditions are met that justify an exception. Under stress, such as heavy load, partial outages, or error storms, they should fail in a way that preserves safety, even if it reduces convenience for a period. When controls are late, permissive by default, or fail open when conditions get difficult, attackers tend to find and exploit those moments. Centralizing common controls is one of the most reliable ways to scale good behavior across teams and services. Rather than asking every squad to re-implement their own authentication middleware, input validation, or output encoding, you can provide shared libraries, gateways, and service meshes that embed these patterns. This reduces variation in quality and keeps policy logic in fewer places, which makes updates and audits much easier. It also gives developers a clearer path to doing the right thing, since the easiest way to build features is to use the supported components. Over time, this centralization builds a platform of secure defaults that projects inherit instead of reinvent. Cryptographic controls are a good example of where strong central enforcement pays off. You want the platform, not individual applications, enforcing protocols such as transport layer security, required cipher suites, certificate validation behavior, and certificate rotation policies. Exceptions like skip certificate validation in this one integration, or allow deprecated cipher suites for this legacy client, will be attractive in the moment but quickly become hard to find liabilities. If exceptions are truly unavoidable, they must be documented, time-bounded, and approved with a clear risk rationale. When crypto rules are consistent, you avoid a patchwork of fragile, one-off configurations that attackers can probe and exploit. Rate limiting, quotas, and circuit breakers are controls that sit at the intersection of security and reliability, and they must be aligned with user impact. Rate limits should protect against brute force, scraping, and resource exhaustion while still allowing legitimate bursts for known usage patterns. Quotas can prevent a single tenant or integration from consuming excessive capacity, but they need careful thresholds and alerting so that you notice when real customers are being throttled. Circuit breakers help applications respond gracefully when dependencies are failing, reducing both cascading outages and opportunities for abuse. When these controls are tuned, They act like shock absorbers that limit how far misuse can propagate. File handling is another area where controls must be concrete and well understood. Guarding file paths means checking for traversal attempts, canonicalizing locations, and avoiding direct use of user-supplied paths whenever possible. Permissions should follow least privilege, ensuring that only necessary directories are writable and that application processes cannot touch sensitive system files. Sandboxing mechanisms, such as Chroot-like environments, container mounts, or restricted virtual file systems, add further isolation. Safe temporary directories with controlled permissions and automatic cleanup help prevent both leakage and escalation opportunities. Treating file handling as a controlled environment, not a general playground, avoids a wide range of subtle vulnerabilities. Protecting communications requires both strong cryptography and careful use of protocol-level controls. Mutual Transport Layer Security, often abbreviated MTLS, provides assurance that both sides of a connection are who they claim to be, not just the server. Header protections, such as strict transport security directives and secure cookie flags, help ensure that traffic stays encrypted and that session tokens are not sent over insecure channels. Configurations should avoid mixed content, downgrade paths, and unsecured management endpoints that quietly bypass the main protections. By treating every communication link as a potential attack path, you create a consistent shield around your applications. Content-focused defenses become crucial wherever browsers and user-generated content intersect. A well-designed content security policy, or CSP, sharply limits where scripts, styles, and other active content may load from, reducing the impact of cross-site scripting vulnerabilities. Framing controls, such as frame ancestors directives, prevent your content from being embedded in hostile pages for clickjacking attacks. Referrer policies manage how much context is leaked when a user moves between pages and domains, moderating unintended exposure of paths or parameters. Combined with robust input sanitization on the server side, these controls create overlapping layers of defense for web interactions. Session lifecycle management is a classic control area where details matter. Secure session creation requires strong identifiers with sufficient randomness, bound to appropriate scopes, and delivered over protected channels. Rotation should occur during key events, such as privilege changes or reauthentication, to reduce the value of stolen or intercepted tokens. Invalidation must be reliable when users log out, change passwords, or when suspicion of compromise arises, ensuring stale sessions cannot be reused silently. Inactivity timeouts should balance user convenience with the risk of unattended sessions, especially on shared or unmanaged devices. Together, these lifecycle steps reduce opportunities for session hijacking and replay. Controls that are not instrumented are hard to trust, so you need signals that show how they behave in real environments. Instrumentation means emitting metrics, logs, and traces that indicate when controls trigger, when they are bypassed, and how often they generate false positives. For example, you might track how many requests were blocked by rate limits, how many certificate validation failures occurred, or how many content security policy violations appeared in browser reports. These signals help you tune thresholds, fix misconfigurations, and identify attempted attacks. They also provide evidence to auditors and stakeholders that controls are not just defined but actually working. To help developers adopt these controls correctly, you should document usage recipes, pitfalls, and migration guides that accompany shared libraries and platform features. Recipes show simple, copyable examples of how to use a control for common scenarios and highlight recommended settings. Pitfall sections explain common mistakes, such as forgetting to rotate secrets, misinterpreting error codes, or applying policies at the wrong layer. Migration guides show how to move from older, weaker patterns to newer, hardened ones with realistic steps and rollback plans. Good documentation lowers the cognitive load of doing the right thing and reduces accidental misuse of well-intentioned controls. Stepping back, you can see a pattern in application security controls that actually work. They are mapped to real threats, initialize early, default deny, and fail safely when stressed. They are centralized where possible, enforcing consistent cryptographic rules, rate limits, and session behaviors across services. They guard file handling, communications, and content with concrete, testable rules, and they are instrumented so their activity is visible and tunable. They are also supported by documentation that makes adoption straightforward and highlights trade-offs. This pattern turns a grab bag of control names into a functioning defensive system. To close, choose one area in your current environment where you know controls are weak or ad hoc, and commit to shipping a hardened library or component there. It might be a shared input validation module, a service mesh configuration that enforces MTLS, or a small middleware that standardizes session handling and logging. Design it with clear defaults, strong documentation, and instrumentation built in. Then, encourage 1 or 2 teams to adopt it and share their feedback. That single hardened building block can then spread gradually, replacing bespoke, fragile implementations with a consistent protective layer. Over time, this is how you build application security controls that not only exist on paper, but truly work in practice. Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.